Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This week on Semi-Serious, I want to talk about tipping. I want to talk about this because the New York Times recently put out a New York Times documentary kind of video about tipping and the correlation between the tipping culture in the US and the Me Too movement. The tipping culture is really problematic in the US for a lot of reasons, and one of those, it turns out, is that it makes patrons, particularly male patrons, feel entitled to the attention or even like physical bodies of their female servers or the female waitstaff. And this is by no means specific to this just male and female relations. Obviously, many people experience sexual harassment or sexual assault in the workplace, and I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm going to be focusing on female waitstaff and male patrons, partially because that's what the New York Times video focused on, but also because that was my personal experience when I was working in food service. So I spent just over a decade in the food service industry in the United States. I started when I was 15 and I ended when I was 26. So yeah, I spent just over a decade. I worked pretty much all through, not all through high school, but I worked in high school, all through college, and then after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I continued to work there because that was one of the industries where I had the most experience, and I felt comfortable doing it. I felt like I was good at my job. Over the course of that decade, I worked as a busser, I worked as a hostess or a host, a food runner, I worked as a server, a bartender, a house manager. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I had a lot of jobs. Oh, I worked as a barista and I worked in fast food. So I kind of did all of it at some point or another. And so I had a lot of experiences. I accumulated a lot of experiences from the server side of the equation, the server side of the relationship between a patron and a restaurant. So yeah, that's my experience, and I'll get into a little bit more about my specific experiences and why this issue pertains to me a little bit later, but I also wanted to talk about the tipping culture in the US as kind of like an introduction to this, because some of you may not be familiar with it, and some of you even who live in the US may not be familiar with it from the standpoint of a server or of someone who's actually working in the restaurant. So I wanted to give a quick little overview on that. I wanted to talk first about the national minimum wages, the federal minimum wage, because the federal minimum wage in the US right now, as of 2009 and continuing into today, is $7.25 an hour. Server minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. The system is essentially designed to make servers and other wait staff rely on tips in order to make up the majority of their paycheck, because at the end of the day, at the end of a shift or at the end of your 2 weeks or whatever, then you might be walking out with a paycheck that has $0 on it, which has happened to me, and I think it's happened to pretty much everybody who's worked in this industry, especially if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're claiming all of the tips that you make. And I know that this is incredibly rare for a server to actually claim all of the tips, especially the cash tips that he or she takes home in a night, and it's a shame because you want to be legal, you want to follow the rules and everything, but you also want to make sure that you're actually making enough money to be able to pay your bills and to put food on the table. It's a very incredibly flawed system, and that leads into my next point, which is why this culture, why tipping is a problem. There are a lot of ways that I could go about talking about this, but I've talked a lot about this with friends and family in the past, because there's a misconception, I think, among a lot of people who've never worked in a restaurant, that it's okay to tip and it's okay to not tip, and it all just depends on the service. And while yes, to some extent that is true, I think that you should tip higher if you have like excellent service, and you can tip lower if you have a rude server or something. I think that it's really important to note that you kind of socially, this unwritten rule that you have to tip. You should always tip, because that person is really relying on your tip, and it's not fair. I'm not saying that this is a fair system by any means. It's absolutely not. It puts undue amount of pressure on the patron and on the server to sort of make up the difference in this in their wage, and that's absolutely not fair, and it's not okay, and I don't agree with it by any means. But what I'm saying is part of the problem is that it creates this unequal power structure between the patron and the server, where the server has to be like over the top obsequious, go so far out of their way to make customers happy. You have servers who are actually being abused in their jobs, and that are they have to deal with verbal abuse, they have to occasionally deal with like sexual abuse or sexual harassment, or even sometimes like actual physical abuse. People should be able to feel safe in their jobs. They should be able to not have to worry about putting their physical or mental well-being on the line in order to go to work, but they do. And also, people on the other side of the table should not be expected to make up a paycheck for someone that they're not employing. At the end of the day, servers don't work for their patrons. They don't work for those guests or those customers. They work for a business. It's not the customer's responsibility to make up the difference in that paycheck, and that's something that I think we could do a lot better at fixing. Like, it seems so simple. There seems like such a simple solution to this. I don't know why it hasn't been fixed yet. Another aspect of this issue, I think, is its relationship to the Me Too movement, or the issues that the Me Too movement is seeking to resolve, which are sexual harassment in the workplace, sexual assault, sexual abuse, basically just the normalization of any kind of sexual abuse. And that becomes normal, and the New York Times video does a really good job of discussing this, so I highly recommend that you watch it. But it talks about how women in serving roles have to put up with a lot more because what's on the line is their livelihood. If they don't put up with inappropriate advances on the part of particularly male patrons, then they may or may not be able to get the tips that they rely on in order to survive. And so it puts them in a really precarious and a really unequal position, because they're having to make light of something that they may or may not take very lightly at all. Some people may have doubts that this is actually happening, that this actually goes on in the restaurant industry or in the food industry, and it absolutely does. And it does for pretty much every woman or even girl that I've worked with has had some form of a Me Too moment while she's been at work. It has a lot to do with the tipping culture, honestly. I think that if we were to get rid of tipping, if we were to pay people a livable wage from the get-go, then it would eradicate a lot of these problems, because you would have employees who would be able to actually stand up for themselves in situations where they felt uncomfortable or harassed. I did want to touch on one of my experiences, or a couple of my experiences, just to show you that yeah, this does happen, and to really take people seriously when it does. The very first time that I experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, I was 15. I was 15 working as a hostess at a breakfast restaurant. My high school boyfriend had given me a necklace as a gift. I think it was a Valentine's Day gift. So I was wearing this necklace, and this man, I would say probably around 40 years old, came in. He came in with, I guess, a colleague or something, another man, and I took them to a table. I put the menus down on the table and told them that their server would be with them in just a moment, and he stopped me and he said, like, kind of gestured to my chest area and asked me if it was real. Like, he was asking if my boobs were real. And it was clear to me that that was what was happening, even as a 15-year-old. it was clear to me that he was making sort of a sexual overture about the size of my breasts. I kind of shrugged it off, laughed it off, and didn't have to deal with him again. So that was nice for me, because I didn't have to continue trying to like deal with his sort of quasi flirtatious weird things that he was saying. But like the fact that that happened to me when I was 15 just goes to show that, like, yeah, children even have to deal with this. I didn't want to mess up the waitress's tips by leaving a bad impression on him, so I didn't say anything, but I shouldn't have had to deal with that anyway. Like, I don't know, maybe it didn't have anything to do with tipping and maybe that guy was just a douchebag, but it has stuck with me to this day, and so I wanted to bring that up. Another instance for me came, this older man came in, and this was when I was like out of university. I had my bachelor's degree and everything, so I was like early 20s. This older man came in and was like very friendly and everything, and I was very friendly because I'm a friendly person, and I was also at work, and so I was trying to like be as welcoming and as approachable and as nice as possible. He came in and ordered and everything, like we chatted and stuff, and it wasn't anything special. It didn't feel like anything weird. But then he came back, I recognized him, and so I was like, oh hey, welcome back, thanks for coming back, you know, what can I get for you, kind of thing. Like, it was professional, but it was still like, I see you, I recognize you, I remember you, because I'm trying to be friendly. After that, he started coming back a lot, and it was always when I was working. It seemed like he would come in and ask for me. It was weird. Every time he came in, he would like want to hug me, and at first I was like, yeah, okay, we're friends, I guess we're friends now. So he would be like hugging me, but then there was one time where he actually like kissed me on the cheek. Not like in an okay European way, because he wasn't from the US, but it was like a kiss. And that made me, as you might imagine, incredibly uncomfortable. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, I feel so dirty. Like, I feel like I must have done something wrong. I must have let this guy on or something. And it got to the point where like I had to actually, this is so uncomfortable for me to talk about, but like I would hide from him. Yeah, so that was like the worst. That was the worst issue of that. It wasn't even like he was tipping me or anything. Like, I didn't have to go and serve him in the traditional sense. Like, but he still felt entitled to my attention, and he still felt like the fact that I was smiling at him and being friendly meant that I was interested in him in a romantic or a sexual way, which it absolutely did not. That's a huge issue in the restaurant industry that I think a lot of people are not aware of. Hopefully this will be the nail in the coffin for the tipping culture in the US, because it's awful, and you feel like you can't say anything. You feel like you just want to hide, because if you say something, if you like actually stand up for yourself, then it could be bad for the business. It's easier, especially if you like the place where you're working and you like the people that you're working with and you want it to succeed, like I did. It's easier to some extent to just sort of grin and bear it, or to swallow your pride and just get on with it so that you can make the money that you need to make. All that to say, as tempting as it might be for people who are having to pay the tips, to say like, oh, well, if we just stop tipping, then they'll have to change the system. But of course, that ignores the fact that people rely on those tips to survive. It's really, really, really crucially important to remember that not tipping is not a solution to this problem. Policy change is the solution. We have to change the way that we think about tipping and the way that we think about restaurant work. Also, we need to ensure that people are being paid a livable wage before we do away with the tipping culture, the tipping system. And until that happens, unfortunately, it does still fall to people who go out to eat, or you know, go out to a bar or whatever, it still falls to you to unfortunately tip your server or tip your bartender. It sucks, it's not fair, it's not a good system, but that's the way it is right now. And until that changes, until we all work together to make sure that that changes, not tipping is not an option. If you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out. And that's something that I have said forever, and I will continue to say until this tipping situation changes, until people in the service industry are actually making a livable wage. And it sucks. It sucks. I agree that it sucks, and I agree that it's not fair, which is why I think that we need to change this. But until it does change, I think that these are things that you should be aware of, particularly as someone who has worked in this industry. That was a lot. I feel like I talked really super fast, so I'm sorry about that. Maybe it's being in the kitchen, I don't know, but thanks for staying with me. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, if you like this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe, because I put out new content every week. And yeah, I have a really weird thing coming for you guys, like hopefully next week. So if you like weird things, then stick around. If there's content that you would like to be seeing more of that you are not, then please leave a comment down below about it, and I will try to make that happen for you. Like, if you want more weight loss vlogs, or if you want more feminism videos or whatever, let me know in the comments down below, and I will try to make that happen for you. But in the meantime, keep being the love that you wish to see in the world, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!